Welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast, where we highlight cool people who do cool things and talk about cool stuff in residence life and college student housing. I'm your guest host, Crystal Lay, and I use the she, her series pronouns. Today, we're talking to Dr. Keith Edwards about the topic of men and masculinity. I became interested in this topic after having the opportunity to pre-read some of the chapters from his latest publication, Unmasking, Toward Authentic Masculinity. I'm very excited to have our guest here today to share his knowledge with us, and I'll start off by having him introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I really appreciate it. Great to be on the podcast. Great to have you be a beta reader and provide feedback on some early chapters in the book. And so you have insider knowledge here that we'll do. My name is Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker and consultant and coach. The best way to find more about me is keithedwards.com. I came up through residence life and housing, was a 3-year RA. I was a hall director. I was a complex coordinator. I was the director of campus life at McAllister College until about 8 years ago. And then since then, I've been working on my own as a speaker, consultant, and coach. And I do lots of things, particularly around residential curriculum and curricular approaches for divisions of student affairs, do a lot of work with a lot of college campuses around that. I also do equity and inclusion work and sexual violence prevention work, and of course do the podcast Student Affairs Now, which has just really been a super fun passion project. And so I host a lot of these conversations. It's a little different. It's real different being in the other chair. So thank you for being the host and giving me the opportunity to talk with you.
Of course, and your wealth of knowledge and experience is so amazing, because now we'll get to delve really, deep into this topic. This is focused on college students and the staff who support them. And so thinking about masculinity, let's start there. How do you define that in a way that is applicable to the work that we do with our college men, if you will?
Yeah, and I think I'll say that this book is not for the academic world. There are articles about putting my man face on and becoming a man in JCSD. So for the super nerds like me who want to read that, there's a dissertation, you can do all of that. But I really wanted to write this book for a mainstream audience. So this book is, I think it'll be helpful to folks in residence life for sure. But I wrote it for like my kid's kindergarten teacher who sees 15 boys every year and probably worries about what they're coming in with and wants to love them the best she can. I wrote it for therapists working with men. I wrote it for men themselves. And so my research started with my dissertation on college men and college men's identity. And then I've continued to interview them every 5 years. So more than 15 years now. And now they're in their about 40 and the life journey. And to your question about masculinity, what I asked them in those very first interviews is, how has the world told you you need to think, feel, and behave as a man, or not think, feel, and behave as a man? And that's what I would define as masculinity. Now, as scholars, we talk about the traditional hegemonic definition of masculinity. Bloggers talk about toxic masculinity. If folks have ever done the man in the box activity, where you put the box and how just list, don't cry, be tough, don't wear pink, all of these things, drive trucks, drink beer, don't drink white wine, right? There's all these things that kind of come with it. That's sort of masculinity. And then of course there's masculinities, because there is what I talk about in the book is the masculinity, which we all know, the masculinity of the dominant culture. But then there are many different other versions of masculinity: Black masculinity, rural masculinity, gay masculinity, Latinx masculinity. And then of course, none of those are monolithic either, because what it means to be a Black man in rural Alabama is very different than what it means to be in downtown LA, and very different than what it means in a community center in Minneapolis. And so all of these masculinities are plural, and all of us are navigating multiple masculinities as we navigate through life. So that's the short, complicated version of masculinity.
Definitely complex, right? And so you talked about, and this came up in the book, this is about the average everyday person who has a man in their life, supporting them, loving them, raising them. What is that pre-work that folks can do to help prepare them as they enter a college setting that is really based around some of these ideas of being hyper masculine, right? You name some of the
Yeah.
expectations that folks may think about, and you get to college, which should be a time of exploration, but these men are still carrying what they think it means to be masculine or to be a man.
Mhm.
What's some of the pre-work that we can do to support the men in our lives heading to college?
Well, what I would tell you is the men in my research all had a secret, and they all thought it was their secret, but they all shared it. And so their secret was they would tell me in these interviews, and they're anonymous, they all have pseudonyms, and it was just me, confidentiality. So they would just tell me the truth. And I would say, what does society expect of you? And they would say all the things that we all know. No surprises there. And then I'd say, well, how does that work for you? And eventually at some point they would like look around and they would lean in and be like, but that's not me. And I'd be like, oh, tell me about that. They'd say, well, I don't really like beer. Um, I I like R&B music, but I don't let my roommates know that. When they come home, I play a different kind of music. Um, I tell my friends I'm going out to hook up with someone, and then I study, but I don't want them to know that. And their secret was, I know that this comes naturally to everybody else, but it doesn't come naturally for me. And so I fake it. I put on a performance, or in the metaphor that they used was I put on a mask. And that was interesting. So then we were talking about what is the mask and who are you behind it, and then some of the ways they lose themselves to the mask. And they would say, I would say, when did you first learn how the world expects you to be as a man? And they all had the same answer. I don't remember not knowing it. So, and now we know through research that loving, caring parents socialize boys and girls differently when they cry at birth, right? When we assign a sex at birth, when those babies cry, and if they're assigned a boy, we say, shh, stop crying. And when that child is assigned a girl, we comfort and reassure, right? And these are loving, I've been in that room twice. These are loving, caring, overwhelmed, want nothing best for their kid, but already in the first moments, we're socializing what we label as boys and girls differently. And then school, music, radio, TV shows, friends, video games, social music, it just older siblings, kindergarten teachers, it just kind of comes in. So what I would say for folks working with college students coming in is, that they have a secret. They know how they're expected to behave. They're very clear about it. They don't think they know what that is. Like, they know, and they don't feel like that fits. And they're trying to cover that up and make sure that no one knows. And so the masking was sort of two purposes: to hide how I don't feel like I'll be man enough, but then to portray an image that I think you will see as man enough. So it was covering up their authentic selves and portraying an image that would be good enough. And so just walk around. I think my participants talk about this as mass consciousness, right? Now that they know this, and they know that everybody else has their secret, they say, oh man, I see this all the time. I see this at work. I see this, now they're seeing it with their sons. They're like, that was not who that guy is. That was just a mask. And so I think that invites some really interesting questions and really different ways of engaging with men when we come with that understanding.
And it sounds so emotional, right? Which is counter to how men are supposed to feel,
Yeah.
right? And so can you talk about, and I felt that emotion too, as folks were recounting or reflecting back on
Yeah.
the things they wanted to do, but maybe felt like they could not.
Yeah.
What are some ways that those behaviors might manifest? And then how do we support those men who are going through that tug of
Yeah.
war of who I want to be versus who I feel I have to show up as? Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Well, I'll tell you the story that I opened the book with, which is about Chauncey. And I opened the book with this story about Chauncey. At 10 years old, his father was incarcerated for a drug crime, which he doesn't know was legitimate or not. But a 10-year-old Black boy, and he feels he has to be the man of the house now. No one asked him to do that. No one assigned that role. That was self-imposed. Now I have to be the man of the house as a 10-year-old boy. And that for him meant no more emotions,
Yeah.
no more crying, no more laughing, no more smiling, just this stoic, unemotional man of the house, which is absurd to expect of a 10-year-old boy. And when he's meeting with me, he's 22. And he's been doing this his whole life. And he talks about a professor of his who passed away the week before we had this conversation. And he'd had a couple of classes where there wasn't super close, but felt a sense of connection. And the fact that this professor had passed away, he went to the memorial service, sat in the back, no one within 20 seats of him. And he says, I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. He wanted that cathartic release. He had the emotion, but he couldn't release it. He couldn't express it. He couldn't communicate. And it wasn't because of what other people would think, because he was alone, essentially. And I think that's a powerful story about when you've been wearing the mask for 12 years, you start to think it's your face. And you lose that authenticity, that emotion. And we socialize men that, this is oversimplified, but one of the ways we socialize men is the only socially acceptable emotion you get to share is anger. So you feel hurt, express it as anger. You're embarrassed, express it as anger. You feel vulnerable, express it as anger. You're lonely, express it as anger. And then we walk around going, why are men so angry?
Yes.
When they're not. They have the whole rainbow continuum of emotions, but they only feel like can express it as anger. And so I know many of the folks listening to this probably are working with men who are tearing down bulletin boards and ripping down exit signs and expressing anger and emotion and cursing. And how might you begin to see that, as I wonder if that person is feeling anger, or are they feeling more vulnerable emotions and expressing anger? And I think, it's hard to get at what's behind the mask when all they want to show you is the mask. And that's where you have to have a little bit of faith. Like, all right, you're showing me anger. You're showing me you don't care. You're showing this doesn't mean anything to you. What do I think might be behind there? And I think that's a challenge for the folks in the roles that your audience is in.
So, in our work, we talk a lot about dominant identities, and men are a dominant identity. There's power, there's influence. And there was a moment in the book where you talk about the importance of being allies to supporting and, being advocates to support men. And so, and even as I hear you talk, there's this empathy, this piece of, wow. And maybe it's coming from being a mom, right? I have two boys. And I see what they're going through and the anger and the frustration and navigating all the emotions. But my question is really framed around, how do you balance this? I see this young person who's struggling and having a difficult time. Yep. And also this is a man. And some of the DEIJ work we do, there's this piece of, this is a dominant identity. How do you reconcile this? I need to care for this human who may be going through things, yet they may be seen as someone who holds an oppressive identity.
Yeah, I think it's important there to remember that these are systems. And these are systems that have created that. One of the things I talk about is shifting our language from I am privileged to I experience privilege. Which I think shifts our relationship there. It's not anything about me and what's made up in me. It's about what's this world around me that I experience privilege. And I do all the time, every day in so many different ways. I think it's also a really different shift to say, I am oppressed to I experience oppression. Right? That really feels differently, because there's nothing about people who experience oppression, nothing wrong with them, right? It's like the system and they experience that. And I think if we look at the systems, one, we look at the roots, right? So men experience privilege because of systems and structures that have existed long before I was born. And those systems, Rocco Capurro talks about the paradox of masculinity, which is that men as a group, without a doubt, objectively, are in the privileged dominant power position in society. Some people will argue about that. I'm not going to. And the paradox is that individual men don't feel powerful. They feel unseen, they feel unheard. And part of the reason why they don't feel powerful is because men, they keep hearing men are in power, men are privileged, men have dominance. And they go, I don't feel that way.
Hmm.
I feel confused, I feel misunderstood, I feel misled. Now, those are true and experiences, but I think if you could think about individual men's experiences, partly because men as a group have power, individual men feel often powerless. And I think that's where the empathy comes in. And I think that's the roots. And then if you think about wanting to create systemic change, dismissing any human beings who have privilege and power as not part of the solution is not going to get us where we want to go. But how do you engage them? And Harry Brode talked about while individual men experience privilege, we would actually be better out without it.
Mm.
We get to walk alone at night. We get paid more for the same jobs, right? All of these different things. Those are concrete and real, but we would actually be better out without those privileges because we would unlock all of our emotional humanity that we just talked about. We would have better relationships across gender, across all sorts of differences. We would have a better society to live in if sexism and genderism didn't exist. Everyone's well-being would go up. Me parenting daughters and you parenting sons would be a much better experience if we could get rid of patriarchy and sexism. And so how do we foster that enlightened self-interest to help men understand this isn't a battle of the sexes or a zero-sum game where men have to give up for women to gain? And we haven't even talked about trans folks in this yet.
Right.
But how do we not make it men versus women, but how do we say patriarchy is ruining all of our lives? And now it becomes a group project to dismantle patriarchy, certainly to benefit women and trans folks who are experiencing oppression. But patriarchy is ruining my life every single day. And I think when men have that enlightened self-interest, we show up more consistently, more effectively, and more sustainably in how we do that.
So what I'm hearing, we really need each other, right, to dismantle. We are all participating in a system, right? And there's pros and cons, benefits. There's all these different pieces that factor in. But if we truly want to start to dismantle, I say strategically flip tables, right? We have to be in community. Versus, like you said, this binary or this men versus women type mentality. I appreciate that.
And I think that, that enlightened self-interest or collective liberation is really, really critical and really changes the conversation. I want to give a quick 4-step process that I learned in part from Men Can Stop Rape, which is a wonderful organization in DC. They're now called MCSR, MCSR, their acronym. And also what I've learned working with starting a lot of student groups on college campuses around violence prevention. What they learned starting their Men of Strength clubs and what I learned doing this is that if you ask men to engage in violence prevention or anti-sexism, you'll get very few, and they're deeply committed, right? You have very few, you get a handful. But if you say to men, if you engage them not from that place, but a different place, and it's a 4-meeting step, right? If you meet every week, this is the 4-meeting step. 1, what's it like to be a man? Oh, it's hard, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's, I don't feel seen, and I pretend, and I've got this secret. Okay, great. Where do you think that comes from? The second one is, where do you think that comes from? Oh, well, music, song lyrics, TV, video games, blah, 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 blah. What does the effect have on people who aren't men? Oh, I mean, the stuff that women and trans folks have to deal with, I can't even imagine. Oh. Well, what would you like to do about that? Well, we should change the culture and society. And so if you start with, you want to change sexism and patriarchy and stop, men's violence, you'll get a very small, deeply committed group. But if you begin with empathy, what's it like being a man? Where do you think that comes from? What's the impact on others who are oppressed is maybe the language we would use. And then what do you want to do about that? Now they're deeply committed to that change for everyone's benefit, including their own. But I think if we just start, that brings people into the conversation.
And it's a nice entry, right? And it builds into this I, we, us, right? I think.
And I think so much of DEI work starts as adversarial. right? And oftentimes it starts with adversarial versus the people who experience privilege. And how do we engage them, bring them in, see their own interest? And that collective liberation work, I think, is less burnout there. There's more engagement. We're doing much more with rather than over or for. I think it just really shifts how we engage.
And a lot of it is that self-work. And that's what I saw you doing with these folks in your study, was helping them engage and reflect upon where they were in their journey, how they came to know what they know. I mean, unpacking that. And that was so beautiful to read through those pieces. You also address and talk about intersectionality, right? They're not just men, right? And then also this historical way we frame and name men and physical character, all these different things. We got to throw that out the window. So how do we really think about men, masculinity, and any other intersecting identities on a broader scale? How would you invite folks to do that?
Yeah, and I think, this comes with, intersectionality is the way to do it. I think that writing for a mainstream publisher, they're like, what does that mean? With an academic, you just cite Crenshaw and you move on. And you either know it or you should know it. But I had to really explain that. And I think, intersectionality and multiple identities are different. Intersectionality is how systems and power impacts based on our identities. And so thinking through, how does sexism privilege this man while racism oppresses him? And then how his non-religious identity, how does that show up and maybe affect his experience and maybe not? And then how do you bring all of these and the salience, right? In this context, what do you do? And so what do you do if you're a Black man in a predominantly white classroom with a white teacher who's a woman, but you got 3 or 4 other Black men who are expecting you to align with Black masculinity, but you're feeling stereotyped threat and you want to conform, so you're not out. Like, just imagine all the masks that you're like, which one do I put on now and how do I do it? Right? When I ask the teacher a question, I might engage in this way, but now when I'm in my group with these other Black men, I'm going to engage in this way. And then now there's 3 Black men and 1 Black woman in our small group. And oh my gosh, which mask am I wearing now? And masking is exhausting. Multiple masking is so exhausting because every context you're trying to reevaluate. And then they also talked about not just their experience of different systems of power, but how they contributed to it. How do I, as a Latino man leading a Latinx group, trying to undo all this racism, but I take up a lot of space. And I'm getting feedback that I'm taking up too much space while I'm trying to do this. And so trying to dismantle one system of oppression while reinforcing another system of oppression is not a failure. That's how this works. And how do you become more conscious and more aware so you don't feel like, oh, I'm taking up too much space, I'll shut down. Well, that's not helpful either. How do you become more aware of that and conscious of that, and not give up, not walk away, not throw up your hands, not move into a shame spiral, but thank you for the gift of that feedback. Now I want to do better. I'll do that with more awareness. And so, yeah, I talk about the mask and then all the other masks, right? So many different masks, and then how men experience these systems and how they contribute to them all at the same time, all the time. It becomes really, really complicated.
Exhausting, and almost heavy, right? The more you have to put on or take off and shift around.
Yes, and on the other side of that is liberation. I think you're 100% right. It becomes heavy, it becomes complicated, it becomes so many things to think about, so many things to be aware of. But on the other side is like vulnerability and connection and authenticity and joy and doing better and not taking up too much space in a meeting and learning and growth. And that's something that I think, had I only done the research with college men, they pointed to it, but I've seen so much of that coming forward. I think college men often feel like this is my 4 years of freedom. This is the only 4 years of my life that this is my own. Because before college, I had to do what parents and teachers and coaches, and after college, it'll be my boss and the mortgage and responsibilities, and this is it. These men after college, life was incredible. They were taking risks and trying things and learning about themselves and changing their minds and changing their life trajectory. What they thought would be this miserable drudgery after college was this liberated, joy-filled time of exploration to figure out, who is this guy behind the mask? I want to get to know him better. And then, and years later, it was, well, I now know who he is, but I don't always do that. So how do I live in integrity?
I I had a moment when reading it, when the folks were reflecting back of it, my brain thought coulda, shoulda, woulda, right?
Mm,
And so programmatically, are there ways that we can foster or encourage some of this exploration in the college
yeah,
settings, in our residence halls or campus living spaces? Is there some of that we can do
yeah,
now, but then also understanding that some of that beauty and knowledge comes with age and being in different settings and being
yeah,
asked to take on more, different roles with more responsibilities as
yeah.
we age. But is there anything that you think we can do now, or programmatic pieces that have worked for you, that you would invite folks to try on their own campuses?
Yeah. I think one of the things that the participants are telling me now is that it doesn't come with age, it comes with growing up. And those are different things, right? It comes with
Mhm.
maturity and exploration and growth, but they're pointing to peers of theirs that are, they haven't grown up. They're 38, but they haven't grown up. And they're pointing to peers of theirs who were much more grown up at an earlier time. I think super practically, um, I would just say those 4 steps of, what's it like? Where does that come from? What's the effect on others? What do you want to do about it? Is a really simple kind of recipe you can do in individual conversations and with groups. I've done that with a lot of groups, particularly around, a 4 meeting plan. The first meeting, we're gonna have this conversation, we're gonna move on. I think super practically, in the mask you live in, a great documentary, Ashanti Branch does this mask activity, and he just takes a blank sheet of paper with a circle on it and says, write down what you hide behind your mask, and then flip it over and write down what you show everybody else. And then if it's a trusting space, you can have people share. If it's a super vulnerable space, you can have people crumple them up and throw them around the room, and then they get one and they share someone else's. And they all say the same thing: hurt, pain, fear. And what do I show? Anger, strength, unemotional. I think that's a real simple activity you can do. And then I often get, when I do presentations on campuses or workshops with faculty and staff, I get often from women who are faculty and staff who say, this is incredible. You got all this behind the scenes footage. They would never say these things to me. What are these incredible questions that you ask? And I will tell you that most of the most powerful stories the men told me, they would say, I've never told anyone this except for my mom. I've never told anyone this except for my high school English teacher, and she was great.
Mm.
So I think they will tell these things, and there was no magic to my questions. My questions were like, what's it like to be a man? How does that work for you? Like, there's no magic. The magic was in the listening. And I think that was a powerful lesson for me from this. Just how powerful just listening can be, and how transformative just listening. There was no intervention, there was no treatment, there was no therapy, there was no coaching. I just listened. And in the 5 and 10 year follow-up, almost all of them said that the 3 hours they spent with me was the most, or one of the most powerful experiences of their college experience. And I didn't coach, therapy, intervention, there's no program. I just asked them about their experience, and I really listened as though they were brilliant about their own experience. And
Mm.
so I think the questions don't matter as much as the listening.
And that comes off the page.
Mm,
The quotes that you shared, the way you capture the emotions and their vulnerability, it again really opens, I think, the readers up to having being able to have some empathy or some understanding or awareness that counter to what I may have believed or thought about how men should show up. There's these really deep and sentimental and also painful emotions that they're holding. And how do we create space to support them? And you also provide some questions, right, to think about in each chapter, which I thought were very thoughtful. So we're coming toward the end of our time. Oh my gosh. So if folks who are listening wanted to learn more about this topic, where should they start? Are there resources other than your book or in addition to your book? Say the book. Where should they start, and what are some resources that you would recommend?
Well, I'd recommend getting the book. It's going to be Unmasking Toward Authentic Masculinity. That would be a great place to start. I think to connect with me, the best way to do that is keithedwards.com. You can find all about me there. And the thing that I would really love is people sign up for my newsletter, Sharing Fire, which is a newsletter I send out the first Saturday of every month with what I'm learning, blog posts, articles, what I'm contributing, and then what's inspiring me. It's totally free. There's no sales pitch. There's no nonsense. There's no nothing. I think there are lots of other resources. Both NASPA and ACPA have knowledge communities and coalition around men and masculinities. Those are great ways to get connected, to learn more and meet incredible people. There's also a ton of great other books that are kind of lined up right here. There are a lot of references in my book about great things. I think The Mask You Live In is a really great documentary for our own learning, but also to share and discuss. I think groups like Mixer, which formerly was Men Can Stop Rape, is a great one. A Call to Men is another great one. I donated to both of those organizations through the pre-sale of the book, and I'm a big fan of theirs. And then podcasts like this and other ones. I think there's lots. You got to be super careful because some of them are like not great perspectives on men, and men are the victims in this world now, and feminism has gone too far, and I think that's nonsense. But there also are some really great folks having really deep, powerful conversations out there to connect with.
Those are all great, and we will get them added to the show notes so we can share them out. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I think there was some great personal pieces in there that we can apply to our lives, some great pro devo as well. And thank you so much, Keith, for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Crystal, for inviting me, for having me on, for being a wonderful host, and for reading some early chapters and helping me dial them up a little bit better. I really appreciate you and everything you've done to be supportive of this.
Thank you so much. And thanks for joining us on this episode of ResEdChat. If you have an idea of a topic or person that you'd like to have on the show, please let us know by reaching out to Roompact. Take care.